All right, we are back with our section on psychology and crime. And we're going to talk here about the treatment for criminals if psychology is either the main driving force or a major factor in criminality. And there have been lots and lots and lots of different programs designed to help treat people with therapy of some kind, with some kind of intervention that would help the psychology of especially young people, to try to lower recidivism, prevent reoffending, to help adolescents turn into normal conforming members of society, non-criminals, etc., etc. The first one of these was the Wayne County Clinic in Detroit in the 1920s. And it was a private clinic with private money. And they took in a bunch of adolescent boys who are juvenile delinquents, tried to give them, the therapy available at the time. And unfortunately, there was no difference in recidivism between the juveniles who went through that program and the juveniles who were treated the way that the juvenile justice system would have otherwise treated juvenile delinquents like them. So there doesn't seem to be much impact there based on that kind of treatment plan. So fast forward to the late 30s, early 40s, we get the Cambridge Somerville study. This is where juveniles from this community were divided up or selected for the study based on half of them were nominated by their teachers or parents or other adults in their lives. Half of them were nominated to the study because they were difficult, and half of them were nominated because they were average, normal, right? And then those 650 boys were randomly assigned to get caseworkers, right? Trained social workers who could help them with therapy and supervision and all kinds of different things. The problem here, well, first off, they were tracked, and the group that was assigned with the caseworkers and got the therapy and got the interventions seemed to have no difference in their deviance after they were finished with the program than the control group. Whether somebody was difficult or average didn't seem to have any effect. Whether the therapy didn't have an effect on either the difficult boys or the average boys compared to the control group. But there were lots of problems in this study. For one thing, late 30s, early 40s, World War II. So a lot of these young boys dropped out at some point in the early 40s and went and joined the military. So there were lots of different issues with this study. But this and a few different kind of replications of that study were done, and none of those cases did they really find any difference between the group that got the supervision and therapy and intervention and those that didn't. So now we fast forward to California in the 1960s. And here we have the Community Treatment Project. Okay? In this one, they got a big group of delinquents among, I think it was 3 different communities, right? They got this big group of delinquents, and then those delinquents were randomly assigned to either intensive supervision or the normal incarceration that juvenile delinquents of that level would get. And then after either the intensive supervision or the incarceration, after the incarceration, they would go on kind of normal parole, right? Now, these two groups were tracked over a period of years to see who committed more deviance afterward. And this one had really interesting results. The treatment group, the one that got the intensive supervision, were the ones that actually had more offenses measured than the control group. But the control group the ones who went to the normal incarceration and parole process, had more revocations of their parole and had to get sent back to the juvenile justice system more often. Now, that might seem contradictory at first, right? Why is it that one group had more offenses, but the other group got sent back into the juvenile justice system more? Well, the theory there is it was the supervision itself that caused both of those outcomes. The treatment group didn't necessarily commit more offenses, they just had more offenses measured because they were the ones under more intense supervision. More supervision, of course, is going to discover a higher percentage of the offenses than the group with less supervision. But at the same time, that intensive supervision creates a relationship between the supervisor and the supervisee, and thus they are kind of less likely to have their parole revoked and get sent back into the juvenile justice system, which is why the treatment group that didn't have that intensive supervision were more likely to then be sent back into the juvenile justice system. So with this one, it's really hard to tell whether the treatment actually had a real impact, because the measurements themselves were so kind of affected by the intervention in ways that the experimenters didn't intend, right? Then finally, we have the Adult Diagnostic Treatment Center, and this is a much more modern, just within the last few decades, program in New Jersey. And instead of being with juveniles, the way the previous programs I discussed were, this one is with adult sex offenders. Okay? So adult sex offenders would come into this program. They were randomly assigned either to this program or kind of, whatever adult correction facility process they would have normally been assigned to. But the treatment group got this cognitive behavioral therapy, which is one of the more common types of therapy in the 21st century, because it has really good results. And in fact, in this case, it actually showed really good results. The sex offenders who went through that cognitive behavioral therapy, supervision, help process were much less likely to recidivate. The control group, the ones who went through the normal process, were 2.5 times more likely to recidivate than the group that got the therapy and the help and the intervention. And this was especially impactful on the medium and high risk offenders who went through this program. So there's kind of mixed results for therapy and programs designed around crime as a psychological issue. With juveniles, there's some decent results in programs, but as we saw in this subsection, there's a lot of programs that didn't seem to have any results at all. But a lot of that might have been due to the fact that the process itself faced various internal validity issues, which if you'd like to learn more about, please take my research methods course. So the programs for juveniles, it's still really difficult to tell whether these therapy, supervision, those kinds of interventions can help reduce deviance and crime and recidivism and all those things. But there is really good evidence for other kinds of issues, especially ones that are focused on one type of offense or one type of offender, such as sex offenders. It seems to be that these therapy style, supervision style interventions can have a real impact on reducing the recidivism of some groups, at least some of the time. And nothing's, it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve every problem every time. But it seems to have a really beneficial impact in those cases. So if you're thinking about psychology as it applies to crime and criminality, it seems to be the answer for how much of an impact psychology has on crime and how much psychological treatments can have on reducing crime, the answer seems to be probably, definitely yes in certain cases, maybe no in many cases. But it's one of those areas, like most of the areas in criminology, that really needs more research and more high quality research to be done. Anyway, that's the end of this section. I really appreciate you watching. I'll see you in the next one.